me tell you something about awareness, because this is where everything truly begins. Even though most people skip past it, they rush toward goals, chase strategies, hunt for shortcuts, but they ignore the most critical starting point: the ability to see themselves clearly. Not the version they present to the world, not the polished image, not the excuses carefully dressed as reasons, but the raw, unfiltered truth of who they are and how they are living. Awareness is uncomfortable. It demands honesty. And honesty has a way of shaking the foundations of the stories we tell ourselves. It forces you to confront patterns you've normalized, habits you've justified, and limitations you've quietly accepted. And the reason many people avoid this step is simple: it is far easier to chase improvement than to admit misalignment. But growth does not respond to avoidance. You cannot change what you refuse to acknowledge. Think about it. How often do people say they want a better life, yet cling to behaviors that guarantee the opposite? How often do they speak about ambition, yet tolerate distractions that quietly steal their momentum? How often do they blame circumstances, timing, or luck while ignoring the decisions they make every single day? Awareness cuts through that fog. It is the moment you stop pointing outward and start looking inward. The moment you ask questions that most people spend a lifetime avoiding. Questions like, what am I repeatedly doing that holds me back? Where am I settling without admitting it? What fears are silently dictating my choices? Those are not easy questions. They are not designed to comfort you. They are designed to wake you up. Because without awareness, you live on autopilot. And autopilot is dangerous. Autopilot convinces you that routine is progress, that being busy is being productive, that time passing is growth happening. But awareness interrupts that illusion. It forces you to notice the gap between motion and direction, between activity and advancement, between existing and evolving. And here's the powerful part: awareness is not about judgment. It is not about criticizing yourself or dwelling on past mistakes. It is about clarity, about observation, about developing the courage to see reality exactly as it is, without distortion. When you become aware, something shifts. Excuses lose their power. Blame loses its grip. Denial loses its comfort. You begin to recognize that many of the barriers you thought were external are in fact internal. That the ceilings you felt were imposed by the world were often constructed by your own doubts, your own hesitations, your own repeated choices. That realization is not discouraging, it is liberating, because what comes from you can be changed by you. Awareness places the steering wheel back into your hands. It reminds you that transformation is not reserved for the lucky or the gifted. It belongs to those willing to observe themselves with honesty and adjust with discipline. Look at any meaningful change in life. It always begins with recognition. The recognition that something is not working, that something must evolve, that something within you requires elevation. Without that moment of recognition, improvement becomes accidental, inconsistent, fragile. But with awareness, change becomes intentional, deliberate, focused. You start noticing how your thoughts shape your actions, how your environment influences your standards, how your daily decisions quietly construct your future. You become conscious of the small behaviors that once seemed insignificant but collectively define your trajectory. That is when growth accelerates, not because circumstances suddenly improve, but because perception sharpens, because you are no longer drifting through your days unaware of the forces shaping your life. You are actively observing, actively correcting, actively aligning. And let me be clear about something. Awareness is not a one-time event. It is a continuous practice, a discipline of self-examination, a willingness to repeatedly ask, am I moving in the direction I claim to value? Are my actions aligned with my intentions? The strongest individuals are not those who never struggle. They are those who never stop evaluating, never stop adjusting, never stop noticing, because life has a way of subtly pulling you off course. Comfort creeps in. Complacency disguises itself as stability. Distractions masquerade as harmless indulgences. Without awareness, you don't even realize the drift until frustration or regret forces your attention. But when awareness becomes a habit, you catch misalignment early. You course correct before stagnation hardens. You remain an active participant in your own evolution rather than a passive observer of your circumstances. And that right there is where personal power is born. So take a moment, not later, not tomorrow, but now. Examine your patterns, your mindset, your routines, not with criticism, but with clarity. Notice what serves you and what sabotages you. Notice where your potential is being honored and where it is being quietly compromised. Because the quality of your future will always be determined by the accuracy of your self-perception. Responsibility is where everything starts to become real. Awareness may open your eyes, but responsibility is what moves your feet. It is the dividing line between those who endlessly analyze their lives and those who actually change them. And let me tell you something that may challenge you, but you need to hear it. The moment you fully accept responsibility for your life is the moment your power returns. Most people misunderstand responsibility. They treat it like a weight, like an obligation, like something imposed upon them by circumstances. But responsibility in its truest form is not a burden. It is ownership. It is the refusal to surrender your agency to excuses, luck, or other people's decisions. It is the quiet declaration that your outcomes, your direction, your standards belong to you. Look closely at how people speak about their lives. Listen carefully, and you will hear a pattern. I can't because if only they had, when things improve, the language of delay, deflection, and dependency. It sounds harmless, even logical at times, but hidden inside those phrases is a dangerous habit. The habit of assigning control to forces outside oneself. And the problem with that mindset is devastatingly simple. What you do not own, you cannot change. Responsibility is the act of reclaiming that ownership. It is a decision to stop negotiating with excuses and start confronting choices. Because whether people admit it or not, many of the frustrations they experience are not imposed upon them. They are tolerated by them, reinforced by them, repeated by them. That is not criticism. That is reality. Responsibility demands that you step out of the comforting illusion that life is happening to you and recognize that life is also happening through you. Through your decisions, your reactions, your discipline, your persistence. It asks you to examine not just what has occurred, but how you have responded to what has occurred. This is where many resist because responsibility removes the luxury of blame. Blame is seductive. It provides emotional relief without requiring behavioral change. It allows you to preserve self-image while postponing self-improvement. But responsibility dismantles that refuge. It turns the mirror towards you and asks the only question that truly matters: what will you do now? Not what was fair, not what was difficult, not what someone else failed to do, but what will you do? That shift is transformative because when you stop waiting for external rescue, you start discovering internal resourcefulness. When you stop expecting ideal conditions, you start maximizing existing ones. When you stop assigning fault, you start designing solutions. Responsibility is not about accepting guilt for everything that happens in life. Many events are beyond your control. Many circumstances are unexpected, unjust, or difficult. Responsibility is about recognizing that while you may not control every event, you always control your response. And your response is where your future is built. Two individuals can face identical obstacles and produce radically different outcomes. Why? because responsibility shapes behavior. One person adapts, learns, persists. The other hesitates, rationalizes, withdraws. The difference is not talent, not luck, not fate. It is ownership. When you embrace responsibility, your mindset changes in subtle but powerful ways. Problems become challenges, delays become preparation, failures become feedback. You stop seeing difficulty as evidence of limitation and start seeing it as material for growth. You become proactive instead of reactive, intentional instead of hesitant, focused instead of frustrated. Responsibility also reshapes your standards. You no longer measure yourself by intentions or comparisons, but by actions and progress. You stop asking whether circumstances are favorable and start asking whether your effort is sufficient, whether your discipline is consistent, whether your habits align with your ambitions. That is a different level of fair living. That is where maturity and strength converge. And here is something profound. Responsibility is contagious. The moment you embody it, you influence your environment. Your energy shifts, your decisions sharpen. Your presence communicates stability, reliability, resolve. People sense when someone operates from ownership rather than excuse, from accountability rather than avoidance. Because responsibility carries a certain unmistakable gravity. It signals that you are no longer negotiating with your potential, that you are no longer comfortable being a spectator in your own story. So pause for a moment and reflect honestly. In what areas of your life have you quietly surrendered ownership? Where have you disguised hesitation as circumstance? Where have you accepted less than you are capable of producing? Not to judge yourself, but to awaken yourself. Discomfort is a part of growth that nobody applauds, yet it is the part that makes everything else possible. People admire confidence, success, strength, mastery, but they rarely talk about the unease, the doubt, the strain that precedes those things. They celebrate the outcome while ignoring the process, and the process is almost never comfortable. Let me tell you something you already know deep down, but may resist accepting. Comfort is seductive, but it is also deceptive. It whispers safety while quietly restricting progress. It convinces you that stability is satisfaction, that familiarity is fulfillment, that ease is evidence you are doing things right. But growth has never lived inside comfort. It has always existed just beyond it. Think about any meaningful advancement in life. It demands stretching, adjustment, risk, uncertainty. And every one of those experiences carries a degree of discomfort, not because something is wrong, but because something is changing. Yet most people interpret discomfort incorrectly. They treat it as a warning sign. They assume unease means misalignment, difficulty means incapability, resistance means retreat. But discomfort is often nothing more than the sensation of expansion. The mind resisting new demands, the habits resisting replacement, the identity resisting evolution. Discomfort is not your enemy, it is your indicator. It signals that you are stepping beyond the boundaries of your previous self, that you are asking more of your abilities, that you are confronting limitations rather than accommodating them. And that sensation, that tension, is not a problem to escape, but a condition to understand. Because everything that strengthens you first challenges you. Muscles grow by resisting weight. Skill develops by confronting difficulty. Confidence emerges by surviving uncertainty. Why should personal growth be any different? But here is where the real battle unfolds. Discomfort tests interpretation. It forces you to decide whether you will see temporary unease as evidence of danger or evidence of development, and that decision determines everything that follows. Some individuals encounter discomfort and withdraw. They shrink their ambitions to preserve ease. They avoid situations that expose inadequacy. They remain within familiar boundaries, mistaking predictability for security. Their lives feel stable, but beneath that stability lies stagnation. Others respond differently. They lean into discomfort with curiosity rather than fear. They recognize that unfamiliarity is the price of expansion, that growth by definition requires operating without guarantees. They do not enjoy discomfort, but they respect its role. That is a powerful distinction because courage is not the absence of discomfort. Courage is the willingness to proceed despite it. Discomfort often arrives wearing disguises. It appears as self-doubt when you attempt something larger than your current confidence. It appears as frustration when progress is slower than your expectations. It appears as anxiety when outcomes are uncertain. And the instinctive reaction is to retreat toward what feels easy, known, manageable. But ease rarely produces transformation. Ease maintains, difficulty develops. Understand this clearly. The path to any elevated version of yourself will feel unnatural at first. New disciplines feel forced. New standards feel demanding. New environments feel intimidating, not because they are wrong for you, but because they are unfamiliar to you. Familiarity is a poor measure of potential. Your future self exists in territories your present self has not yet normalized. And the bridge between the two is sustained discomfort. Now, let me be precise. This is not about reckless suffering or unnecessary struggle. Not all discomfort is valuable, but the discomfort that accompanies learning, improvement, disciplined effort, calculated risk, that discomfort is essential. It is the friction that shapes capability. When you learn to tolerate it, something remarkable happens. Your threshold expands. What once intimidated you becomes manageable. What once felt impossible becomes routine. What once felt impossible becomes expected. That is how resilience is built, not through comfort, but through repeated exposure to challenge, through the realization that discomfort is survivable, navigable, temporary. That unease does not destroy you. Avoidance weakens you far more reliably than difficulty ever could. And there is another truth hidden here. Discomfort refines clarity. It reveals priorities. It separates superficial desires from genuine commitments. When things are easy, everyone appears dedicated. When things become uncomfortable, true intentions are exposed. Discomfort asks a simple, relentless question. How badly do you want the life you claim to desire? Because aspiration without tolerance for discomfort is merely preference. So when you encounter that uneasy feeling, when progress feels slow, when effort feels demanding, when uncertainty feels heavy, pause before interpreting it as a signal to stop. Consider the possibility that you are not encountering a barrier, but experiencing growth in real time, that you are not being blocked, you are being stretched. Discipline is where intention stops being a thought and starts becoming a force. It is the quiet architecture behind every meaningful achievement, the invisible structure that supports excellence long before excellence becomes visible. People often speak about motivation, about inspiration, about feeling driven, but discipline operates at a deeper, more reliable level. It does not depend on mood. It does not negotiate with convenience. Discipline is decision in its most consistent form. Understand something essential. Motivation is emotional, and emotions are unstable. They rise, they fall, they fluctuate with circumstances, energy levels, and external events. If your progress depends on feeling inspired, your progress will always be fragile. Some days you will move forward powerfully, other days you will stall completely. That inconsistency is not a reflection of your potential. It is a consequence of relying on a force designed to be temporary. Discipline is different. Discipline is structural. It is a system you build that carries you forward regardless of how you feel. It is a standard you uphold when enthusiasm fades. It is a behavior you execute when excuses sound persuasive. Discipline transforms effort from occasional burr, steps into sustained momentum, and sustained momentum is what produces results. Consider how easily the mind seeks comfort, how quickly it justifies delay, how convincingly it argues for postponement. Tomorrow will be better. I'll start when conditions improve. I'm not at my best today. These thoughts feel reasonable, harmless even, but repeated often enough, they quietly dismantle ambition. They convert days into weeks, weeks into years, years into regret. Discipline interrupts that pattern. It eliminates the daily debate. It removes the question of whether you will act and replaces it with the expectation that you will. Not because conditions are ideal, not because energy is high, but because your standards are non negotiable. Discipline is the practice of honoring commitments made to yourself, especially when doing so is inconvenient. That is where its power lies. Anyone can perform when circumstances are favorable, when energy is abundant, when progress feels exciting. But discipline reveals itself when effort feels tedious, when results are invisible, when distractions are plentiful. It is easy to pursue goals when the path feels rewarding. Discipline is what sustains pursuit when the path feels repetitive. And greatness is built in repetition, not dramatic effort, but consistent effort, not occasional intensity, but daily reliability. There is a misconception that discipline is harsh, restrictive, joyless, that it demands relentless rigidity. But true discipline is not punishment. It is alignment. It is a deliberate organization of your behavior around your priorities. It is a refusal to let impulse dictate direction. Far from being oppressive, discipline is liberating. It frees you from the chaos of inconsistency, from the stress of indecision, from the regret of unrealized potential. Because when your actions become predictable, progress becomes inevitable. Discipline also reshapes identity. Each time you follow through despite resistance, you reinforce a powerful internal message. I am someone who executes. Each completed commitment strengthens self trust. Each resisted distraction strengthens focus. Over time, discipline eases to feel like effort and begins to feel like character. You are no longer forcing behavior. You are expressing identity. This is why discipline compounds. Small daily actions repeated consistently generate outcomes disproportionate to their individual significance. A single discipline day may seem insignificant. A week may appear modest, but months and years of disciplined behavior create transformations that appear extraordinary from the outside, yet feel entirely logical from within. The extraordinary is often just the accumulated effect of the consistent. Now consider the alternative. The cost of undisciplined living is rarely immediate, which is why it is so dangerous. Missed efforts do not instantly produce catastrophe. Delays do not immediately destroy dreams. The consequences are subtle, gradual, cumulative. Progress slows, confidence erodes, opportunities narrow, and by the time the damage becomes undeniable, the pattern is already hardened. Discipline protects against that drift. It anchors you to direction. It ensures that movement continues even when enthusiasm disappears. And here is something profound. Discipline is not built through grand gestures. It is built through small decisions made repeatedly. The decision to begin when hesitation arises. The decision to continue when boredom appears. The decision to prioritize long-term gain over short-term comfort. Strength is forged in these moments. Character is revealed in these choices. So when you think about discipline, Do not imagine dramatic sacrifice. Imagine quiet consistency. Imagine removing negotiation from your commitments. Imagine becoming someone whose actions do not depend on mood, whose progress does not depend on inspiration, whose standards do not fluctuate with convenience. Distance between potential and achievement is almost always measured in disciplined behavior. And those willing to master discipline discover something remarkable. Success becomes less mysterious, less accidental, less dependent on external validation. It becomes the natural consequence of structured effort applied over time. Patience is one of the most misunderstood forces in personal growth because it often feels passive when in reality it is deeply active. People associate patience with waiting, with inactivity, with delay. But true patience is not about doing nothing, it is about continuing to act without immediate reward. It is sustained effort without visible confirmation. It is the discipline of remaining committed while results are still forming beneath the surface. And that requires strength. We live in a world conditioned for immediacy. Everything around you encourages speed, instant responses, instant entertainment, instant feedback. The mind becomes accustomed to quick validation, to rapid outcomes, to visible progress. So when growth unfolds at its natural pace, when effort does not instantly produce results, frustration emerges, doubt creeps in, the temptation to abandon the process grows louder. But meaningful transformation has never obeyed the timeline of impatience. Consider how nature operates. Nothing of lasting value appears overnight. Seeds remain buried long before they break the surface. Foundations are laid long before structures rise. Muscles endure repeated stress long before strength becomes visible. Yet people expect personal growth to defy this universal principle. They expect immediate evidence for long term pursuits. Patience challenges that expectation. It demands trust in processes you cannot yet see. And this is where many falter, not because they lack ability, but because they misinterpret delay as failure. They assume that if progress is not visible, progress is not occurring. They mistake silence for stagnation. They confuse time with inactivity. But development is often invisible long before it is undeniable. Patience is the ability to respect that invisibility, to continue striving when outcomes are uncertain. There is a psychological tension that accompanies patience. The mind seeks reassurance. It wants proof that effort is worthwhile, that direction is correct, that results are approaching. Without that reassurance, anxiety can surface. The path feels ambiguous, the destination feels distant, and the instinctive reaction is to seek quick alternatives, immediate gratification, easier routes. Patience protects depth. It prevents you from abandoning long term rewards for short term relief. Understand this clearly. Impatience is not merely emotional discomfort, it is often a destructive force. It encourages premature quitting. It promotes constant shifting of direction. It undermines consistency. Great achievements are not usually defeated by difficulty. They are defeated by the inability to persist through periods of apparent stillness. Patience sustains momentum through those periods. It allows effort to compound. It allows growth to mature. Patience also reshapes perception. Instead of demanding immediate results, you begin valuing incremental progress. Instead of measuring success by speed, you measure it by alignment and consistency. You stop asking, why is this taking so long? And start asking, am I continuing to move forward? That shift is transformative because progress is not always dramatic. B, often it is subtle, gradual, cumulative, small improvements repeated. consistently produce outcomes that appear sudden only to those who did not witness the process. What seems like an overnight success is usually the visible emergence of long hidden effort. Patience is what makes such emergence possible. There is another dimension to patience: emotional resilience. Remaining committed without immediate validation requires a certain steadiness of mind. It requires the capacity to tolerate uncertainty without surrendering belief. It requires resisting the urge to constantly evaluate worth based on temporary outcomes. This is not easy, but it is essential. Those who master patience develop a remarkable stability. They are not easily shaken by delays or discouraged by slow progress. They understand that time is not an adversary, but an ally. That growth often demands seasons of preparation, refinement, adjustment. That rushing process is designed for gradual development frequently produces fragile results. Patience honors timing. It aligns effort with reality rather than expectation. And here is something powerful: patience does not weaken ambition, it strengthens it. It filters impulsive desire from genuine commitment. Anyone can feel enthusiastic at the beginning of a pursuit. Patience determines who remains when enthusiasm fades, when novelty disappears, when effort becomes routine. Patience is sustained belief expressed through continued action. So when you find yourself questioning the pace of your progress, when frustration whispers that results should already be visible, pause and remember something fundamental: absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Development may be occurring in dimensions you cannot yet measure. Keep building, keep refining, keep moving. Identity is the invisible force shaping every visible result in your life. Long before your actions produce outcomes, your self perception defines your behavior. The way you see yourself, your internal narrative, your silent beliefs, your unspoken assumptions, quietly dictates what you attempt, what you avoid, what you persist through, and what you surrender to. Most people focus on changing external conditions. They chase new strategies, new routines, new goals. But lasting transformation does not begin with behavior, it begins with identity. Because behavior that conflicts with identity is never sustainable. You can force temporary change. You can mimic discipline for a while. You can adopt new habits briefly. But if your internal self image remains unchanged, the old patterns inevitably return. You will always drift toward the person you believe yourself to be. This is why identity is so powerful and so often overlooked. It operates beneath awareness, beneath intention, beneath even conscious decision making. It shapes your comfort zones, your risk tolerance, your resilience, your standards. Without realizing it, people construct invisible boundaries around their potential simply by the labels they accept. I'm not naturally confident. I'm just not disciplined. I've never been good at that. These statements may feel like observations, but they function as they reinforce consistency with a familiar self image. The mind seeks alignment between belief and action. So when identity imposes constraints, behavior obeys. Identity is not merely how you describe yourself, it is how you permit yourself to act. And here lies the critical realization: identity is not fixed. It is constructed, shaped through repeated thoughts, repeated actions, repeated interpretations of experience. What feels like inherent nature is often accumulated conditioning, a lifetime of small reinforcements gradually solidified into perceived truth. But constructed identities can be reconstructed. That is where transformation becomes possible.
Consider how change typically unfolds.
Someone decides to pursue a new goal, adopt a new discipline, reach a higher standard. Initially, effort feels unnatural, resistance appears, old habits pull strongly. Why? Because the behavior is not yet congruent with identity. The mind still recognizes the old self image as normal, and anything beyond it feels forced, unstable, temporary. This is why many people abandon growth prematurely. They mistake unfamiliarity for incapability. They assume difficulty means misalignment rather than recognizing that identity itself is undergoing expansion. But identity evolves precisely through this tension, through acting beyond prior self definitions until new behaviors feel natural. You do not become confident and then take bold action. You take bold action and confidence gradually emerges. You do not become disciplined and then execute consistently. You execute consistently and discipline becomes identity. Identity follows evidence, not the other way around. Every action you repeat sends a message to your mind about who you are. Every commitment you honor reinforces a narrative of reliability. Every challenge you confront reshapes perceived capability. Over time, behaviors that once required effort begin to feel automatic because they are no longer perceived as deviations from identity, but expressions of it. This is the quiet mechanism behind personal evolution. Small actions consistently aligned with a desired self image gradually reconstruct identity itself. But there is another dimension here. Identity requires intentional authorship. If you do not consciously shape your self perception, experience will shape it for you. Failures may become labels, rejections may become definitions. Temporary struggles may harden into permanent beliefs. Without awareness, the mind easily confuses events with essence. I failed becomes I am incapable. Identity becomes distorted not by reality, but by interpretation. This is why conscious identity design is essential. It requires separating experience from definition, recognizing that setbacks describe moments, not character, that limitations describe skills not yet developed, not potential permanently restricted. The strongest individuals understand this intuitively. They treat identity as dynamic, adaptable, responsive to deliberate effort. They do not ask, is this who I am? They ask, is this who I am becoming? That subtle shift changes everything because identity oriented toward growth invites expansion. Identity anchored to past evidence enforces stagnation. And understand something profound: the future you desire demands an identity capable of sustaining it. Greater success requires greater discipline. Greater responsibility requires greater resilience. Greater opportunity requires greater self trust. External achievements unsupported by internal identity are fragile and temporary. You must become internally before you can sustain externally. So, examine the narratives you carry, the labels you accept, the assumptions you repeat. Are they empowering or restrictive? Do they expand your perceived capability or confine it? Do they reflect past conditioning or future intention? Because identity is not discovered, it is built choice by choice, action by action, belief by belief. Persistence is the quiet force that separates momentary effort from lasting achievement. It is not dramatic, not glamorous, not loud. It does not seek attention or recognition, yet it stands behind nearly every story of success you have ever admired. Because while talent may create opportunity and motivation may ignite action, persistence is what carries you through the long, uncertain stretches where progress feels slow and quitting feels reasonable. Understand something essential. Difficulty is not the exception in any meaningful pursuit. It is the rule. Obstacles are not interruptions of the journey, they are the journey. Delays, setbacks, frustrations, unexpected resistance, these are not signs that you are on the wrong path. They are inherent to growth, inherent to ambition, inherent to any attempt to move beyond the ordinary. Yet most people interpret struggle as a verdict. They encounter resistance and assume limitation. They face delay and assume failure. They experience discomfort and assume retreat. Persistence challenges that interpretation. It refuses to treat temporary difficulty as permanent defeat. It recognizes that progress is rarely linear, rarely smooth, rarely predictable. That forward movement often hides inside moments that feel like stagnation. That breakthroughs frequently arrive disguised as prolonged effort with no immediate reward. It asks, is this worth it? Why is this taking so long? Shouldn't this be easier by now? These questions feel rational, even intelligent, but beneath them lies a dangerous impulse, the impulse to abandon long term rewards for short term relief. Because quitting provides immediate comfort, continuing requires resilience. Persistence is not about stubbornly repeating ineffective actions. It is not rigid endurance without reflection. True persistence is adaptive. It learns, adjusts, refines, recalibrates, but it does not surrender. It accepts that strategy may change while commitment remains unshaken, that methods may evolve while direction stays intact. This distinction is critical. Those who persist intelligently do not simply push harder, they grow wiser. They treat setbacks as information rather than condemnation. They analyze failures without internalizing them. They recognize that every challenge contains instruction for those willing to observe carefully.
Persistence transforms obstacles into education.
Without persistence, difficulty becomes a stopping point. With persistence, difficulty becomes a training ground. Consider how easily enthusiasm fades in any endeavor. At the beginning, energy is high, vision is vivid, motivation feels effortless. But novelty inevitably disappears. Effort becomes repetitive, progress slows. And this is where persistence quietly takes center stage because success is not built in moments of excitement. It is built in moments of monotony, in showing up when inspiration is absent, in continuing when results are invisible, in maintaining standards when shortcuts appear tempting. Persistence is not tested when things are easy. It is revealed when things are hard. There is also an emotional dimension to persistence. Setbacks can trigger doubt. Rejection can trigger frustration. The internal dialogue grows louder, often more persuasive than any external obstacle. And persistence, he requires mastering that dialogue, not silencing doubt entirely, but refusing to let it dictate action. Feel uncertainty, but move forward. Feel frustration, but remain steady. Persistence is not the absence of discouragement. It is action despite discouragement. And here is something profoundly important. Persistence compounds just as discipline does. Each time you continue despite difficulty, you reinforce resilience. Each time you refuse to quit, you strengthen self trust. Over time, what once felt exhausting becomes manageable. What once felt overwhelming becomes familiar. You develop an internal certainty that obstacles are temporary. That effort accumulates. That endurance produces advantage because most people stop. They withdraw when progress slows. They abandon when challenges intensify. They surrender when outcomes delay. Persistence quietly capitalizes on that reality. It allows time, effort, and experience to work in your favor. It turns endurance into a competitive advantage, not through extraordinary bursts of effort, but through extraordinary consistency of continuation. When you encounter resistance, when the path feels heavy, when progress feels distant, when doubt feels persuasive, remember something simple yet powerful. The urge to quit is often strongest just before growth occurs. Difficulty does not announce its expiration date. Breakthroughs do not send advance notice, but those who persist long enough inevitably encounter moments that would have remained unreachable had they surrendered earlier. Becoming is the part of the journey that few people truly understand while they are living it. Everyone celebrates arrival, everyone admires achievement, But becoming that slow, demanding, often invisible process of transformation is where the real story unfolds. It is where identity reshapes, where resilience hardens, where character is quietly forged under pressures that rarely attract applause. Because becoming is not an event, it is a progression. It is not marked by a single breakthrough, a single dramatic moment. It is built through countless small decisions, repeated efforts, unseen struggles. It is happening even when you feel uncertain, even when progress seems unclear, even when the destination feels distant. Most people imagine growth as a straight line, effort applied, results received, confidence strengthened. But reality is far more complex. Becoming often feels like confusion before clarity, difficulty before strength, doubt before conviction. The external world may not immediately reflect the internal changes taking place, and that gap can be deeply unsettling. Yet that gap is natural because internal evolution precedes external evidence. While you are striving, adjusting, learning, enduring, something subtle yet powerful is unfolding. Your tolerance for difficulty expands. Your perception of obstacles shifts. Your standards elevate. Your reactions refine. You are not merely working toward outcomes, you are constructing the person capable of sustaining those outcomes. This distinction changes everything. Success is not simply about achieving goals, it is about becoming someone for whom those goals are normal, and that process cannot be rushed. Becoming demands patience, persistence, discipline, and above all, trust. Trust that progress is occurring even when validation is absent. Trust that effort is reshaping you even when results are delayed. Trust that challenges are not random interruptions, but essential components of development. Becoming often feels uncomfortable because it disrupts familiarity. Old habits lose their grip. The old assumptions lose their certainty. Old comfort zones lose their appeal. You begin sensing that who you were is no longer sufficient for who you intend to be. Yet who you are becoming has not fully stabilized. That in between space is powerful, but it is also fragile. It is where many retreat, not because they lack ability, but because uncertainty feels unbearable. They misinterpret temporary instability as misdirection. They seek the safety of familiar limitations rather than endure the ambiguity of growth. But becoming by its very nature requires moving forward without complete reassurance. It requires faith in your trajectory. Consider how every challenge you face contributes to becoming. Difficulties refine judgment. Failures sharpen strategy. Resistance strengthens resolve. Even moments of doubt deepen self awareness. Nothing is wasted when interpreted correctly. Every experience becomes material for development. Life is not merely testing you, life is shaping you. And shaping rarely feels comfortable. Pressure, friction, resistance. These forces do not exist to break you, but to build you, to reveal capacities you cannot discover through ease alone, to develop strengths that comfort could never produce. Becoming also requires releasing attachment to immediate comparison. Growth is deeply individual, unfolding at rhythms determined by circumstance, effort, and experience. When you measure your progress against others, impatience and discouragement easily arise. But becoming is not a race against external timelines. It is alignment with internal potential. Some transformations take longer because they build deeper foundations. Some journeys feel slower because they demand greater reconstruction. But speed is a poor measure of significance. Depth, durability, and integrity of growth matter far more. And here is something profoundly important. Becoming is never complete. There is no final state of perfection, no permanent plateau of mastery. Each level of growth reveals new challenges, new demands, new opportunities for refinement. What once felt extraordinary becomes ordinary, and new horizons emerge. This is not a flaw of the journey. It is the beauty of it because becoming is the continuous expansion of capacity, awareness, and capability. It is the refusal to remain confined by previous versions of yourself. It is the recognition that potential is not a fixed destination, but an evolving frontier. So if you find yourself in that uncertain space, striving, struggling, progressing without constant validation, do not mistake the absence of clarity for the absence of growth. Becoming often unfolds most powerfully when it feels least dramatic, when changes are internal, when transformation is still taking shape. Stay steady, stay committed, stay aware of the deeper process at work. Because one day, what now feels like effort will feel like identity. What now feels like challenge will feel like capability. And you will look back and recognize that the most difficult phases were not barriers, they were construction. If this message speaks to you, carry it with you and reflect on the person you are gradually becoming through your daily decisions.